There is a body on the road. You have passed 3 today. You stopped looking at them after the first one. Not because you are cold, not because you don't care, because looking costs energy. And energy is the one thing you do not have. It is 1316. You are somewhere in northern France, or maybe Flanders, or maybe the Rhine Valley. It barely matters because every road in Europe looks the same right now. Mud, rain, and the people who couldn't keep walking. The chronicles of this period, written by monks who watched from their monastery windows, describe what they saw with a precision that they clearly wish they didn't have. People eating dogs, eating cats, eating the bark off trees, eating each other. That last one is not a metaphor. The chronicler of Tournai recorded it. The chronicler of Bruges recorded it. Multiple independent sources, multiple countries, the same thing. When enough people are hungry enough for long enough, the rules stop. All of them. This is an AI reconstruction based on real historical records. Comment where you're watching from. To understand how Europe ended up eating itself, you need to understand what Europe was before 1315. Medieval Europe in the early 1300s was, by its own standards, doing well. The population had doubled over the previous 2 centuries. New farmland had been cleared from forest. Villages had grown into towns, towns into cities. The great cathedrals were being built. The universities were being founded. By the standards of the era, this was a civilization at or near its ceiling. And that was exactly the problem. The ceiling. European agriculture in 1315 was operating at maximum capacity on marginal land. Every field that could be farmed was being farmed. Every hillside that could be terraced was terraced. Every forest that could be cleared had been cleared. The population had grown to the absolute limit of what the land could support under the farming technology of the era. There was no buffer, no surplus, no reserve. A good harvest fed everyone, barely. A bad harvest meant people died. Then 1315 arrived. The spring of 1315 was the wettest anyone alive could remember. Rain from May through August without stopping. Not English drizzle, biblical rain. The kind of rain that turns fields into marshes and marshes into lakes and destroys planted crops before they can develop root systems strong enough to survive standing water. The grain rotted in the ground. Not all of it. Enough of it. The harvest of 1315 was roughly half of normal in most of Northern Europe. Half. People could survive half a harvest. Badly. With rationing, with eating seed grain that should be saved for next year's planting, with slaughtering livestock that should be kept for breeding. They survived 1315 by consuming their future, and then 1316 arrived. It rained again. The same rain, the same standing water, the same rotting crops, but this time the people entering the wet season were already weakened from the previous year. They had no stored grain. The seed grain was gone. Half the livestock was gone. There was nothing left to eat through the winter, and no prospect of anything better in spring because the spring was going to be wet again. This is where you are. 1316. The second year. The hunger that started last year has moved past discomfort into something else. Your body has been running below its caloric requirement for 8 months. You have lost muscle mass. Your own body has been eating itself for weeks, burning through whatever reserves it had, and then starting on the structural tissue. You are not thin. You are translucent. Your joints ache with a specific deep bone pain that is not injury. It is the specific pain of a skeleton that is being demineralized as your body strips calcium from bone to keep your heart beating. You walk because walking is the only thing left to do. You are heading for the city because rumor says there is grain in the city. There isn't. Or there was, and it's gone. Or there is some, but not for people like you. The road to every major city in Northern Europe in 1316 is lined with people making this journey. People from the countryside who have eaten their animals and their seed grain and the leather from their shoes and are now walking towards somewhere that might be better. Most of them will not find better. They will find more people, more hungry people, and a city that cannot feed itself, let alone its refugees. You reach the city. The gates are open because there are too many people to process. The guards who used to check papers and collect tolls have given up because the line of refugees never ends and has not ended for 6 weeks, and the guards themselves have not eaten properly in 4 days. The city smells. Not the usual smell of a medieval city, which is already a substantial assault on modern sensibilities. Something worse. Something underneath the normal smell of people and animals and open sewers. Something that your nose identifies and your brain refuses to accept. You walk toward the market square because the market square is where food is, and where food is the only destination that matters. The market square has food. 3 stalls. In a market that normally has 40. One stall is selling bread. The bread is dark and dense and clearly adulterated with something that is not grain. The specific gray tint suggests clay or sawdust mixed with the last of the flour to make it go further. The price is 4 times what bread cost 18 months ago. You do not have 4 times the money. You do not have the money at all. One stall is selling something in a pot. You look at it and don't ask what it is. The person selling it doesn't meet your eye when you look at the pot. You don't buy it. The third stall is selling nothing. The third stall's vendor is sitting behind an empty table because he sold out this morning and cannot get more supply because there is no supply chain, because the supply chain broke in 1315 and has not been repaired, because this is not a logistics problem. You do not eat today. This is not new. You did not eat yesterday. You had something the day before, a piece of bread that cost more than it should have and was smaller than it should have been, and before that 3 days of nothing. Chronic starvation changes the relationship between hunger and sensation. In the early days of not eating, hunger is loud. It growls, it cramps, it dominates. By the 3rd week, it goes quiet. Not because it stops, because the body adjusts to its new normal, and the signal becomes constant background noise rather than urgent alarm. You are past the alarm stage. What you feel now is not hunger in the familiar sense. It is an absence, a hollowness that sits in your chest and your stomach simultaneously, and that makes everything slightly slower and slightly further away, as if you are watching your own life through glass. You have learned to move slowly. Moving quickly costs calories. Every gesture, every step is budgeted. You walk in a straight line and do not deviate. It is May. In a normal year, May in northern France means warmth, the last cold gone, the crops growing, the landscape, the specific green of European spring. This is not a normal year. The rain that has been falling since the previous May is cold. Not winter cold. Cold enough to be uncomfortable. Cold enough to soak through the single layer of clothing that is all you have. Cold enough that a body with no fat reserves underneath the skin has no insulation against it. Hypothermia in a starving person is not the same as hypothermia in a well-fed person. Fat is insulation. It is warmth stored in the body against cold. When the fat is gone, the cold reaches the core faster. The shivering that a healthy person can sustain for hours exhausts a starving person in 20 minutes. Because shivering requires calories, and there are no calories. You are wet. You have been wet for 3 days. Your clothes have not dried because the rain does not stop long enough for anything to dry. Your feet are inside leather shoes that have been wet since Tuesday, and your toes are a color that does not look like toes. The people who die first in a famine are not the ones who were already sick. They are the youngest and the oldest, the children who have no reserves, and the elderly who have none left, and the people who were marginal before it started, the ones who were already poor, already underfed, already one bad season from the edge. They go first, then the people who were managing, then everyone else. The Great Famine killed between 10 and 25% of the population of Northern Europe. The range is wide because the records are incomplete, and because dead people stopped generating records. In some regions, the toll was higher. In some cities, the chroniclers stopped counting. Not because the dying stopped, because there was nobody left to write it down. The rules are going, not all at once, not dramatically. One at a time, quietly, in the order that hunger dictates. The first rule to go is private property. When people are starving, food stops being owned. It is there or it is not there. And if it is there, the person nearest to it when they are hungry enough will take it. This is not a moral failing. This is biology. The body's survival drive is older and stronger than any legal or ethical framework human civilization has constructed. Granaries are broken into. Livestock is stolen from fields at night. The mills are seized by crowds who overpower the miller and distribute the flour themselves. The king's hunting forests, reserved by law for the nobility's deer, poaching punishable by blinding or hanging, are stripped of every animal within walking distance of a village. Then the second rule goes. Parents are leaving children on the roads. Say that again, let it land. Parents leaving their children, not in safe places, on roads, in fields, outside monastery gates, where there is a slight chance someone might find them and have enough to feed them. The chronicles record this with the specific horror of people who saw it and could not stop it. The chronicler of Ghent writes that children were left by the roads in great numbers. The chronicler of Mechelen describes mothers abandoning infants in doorways. We have to understand what this means without judging the people who did it. A mother with 3 children and no food has 3 children who are dying. If she can keep one alive by releasing the burden of the other 2, the calculus of survival, not morality, not cruelty, pure desperate arithmetic, produces a decision that history has recorded and struggled to process ever since. These were not monsters. These were people at the absolute end of what a human being can endure, making the only calculation that hunger left them. The records exist. Multiple sources, multiple countries, multiple chroniclers writing independently. People ate people. In Ireland, the chronicles recorded. In Poland, in the Rhine Valley, in Flanders. The accounts vary in their specific horror, but not in their fundamental content. When the famine was at its worst, in the worst hit areas, in the deepest part of the years 1316 and 1317, some people crossed the line that civilization had constructed and that civilization assumes will never be crossed. It was crossed. Not everywhere, not by everyone, but enough people in enough places that multiple independent observers recorded it as fact, not rumor. The most disturbing account comes from Ireland, where the Annals of Connaught record that people dug up bodies from graves to eat them. This is not a sensational addition to the story. This is a documented historical fact, and what it tells us is not about the people who did it. It tells us about hunger, about what hunger actually is when it reaches its terminal state, about what the human body will do when the choice is between crossing the last line or ceasing to exist. The line held for almost everyone, almost everywhere, almost. The church is full, not with worshippers, with bodies. The monasteries across Northern Europe have opened their gates to the starving because the monasteries have grain stores and the monks have a religious obligation to feed the hungry. But the grain stores are not infinite, and the hungry are. Within weeks, the monasteries are overrun. People are dying in the monastery courtyards. People are dying in the church aisles. People are dying on the monastery steps in such numbers that the monks cannot bury them quickly enough. In Tournai in 1316, the city buried 2,800 people in a single month. The city's normal monthly death rate was perhaps 30. In Ypres, 5 people a day were dying at the city gate. The city gate, not the hospital. The gate. People arriving and collapsing before they made it inside. The King of England, Edward II, issued emergency price controls on grain. The grain merchants ignored them because price controls don't work when there is no grain to control the price of. The King of France ordered food distributed to the poor of Paris. The distribution points were mobbed. People were crushed in the crowds trying to reach the food. Some died in the crush without ever getting any. The nobility are eating. Not well. Even the wealthy are affected. The prices of everything have risen to the point where maintaining a household is difficult, even with resources. But they are eating. The visual contrast in 1316 Europe is not subtle. The thin and the not thin. The mobile and the stationary. The ones who will survive this and the ones who won't. And the line between them is not virtue or effort or character. It is birth. You were born on the right side of it, or you weren't. The church preaches patience, God's will. The famine as punishment for sin, which means the correct response is prayer and penance, not redistribution of the grain that the church's own estates are storing. Some clergy distribute their grain, some open their granaries, some do not. The ones who do not argue that their obligation is to the church's long-term survival, not individual charity in a crisis. That the grain must be kept to seed next year's fields. That if they give it all now, there will be nothing for the recovery. They are not wrong. They are also watching people die on their doorstep. Both things are true at the same time, and there is no answer. There has never been an answer to this particular situation. There is only what you do and what you don't do and what you can live with afterward. You are standing in the street outside a monastery whose gates are closed. You can hear grain being loaded onto carts inside. You cannot get in. You sit down against the wall. The rain is still coming. The rain has not stopped for 14 months. In 1317, the rains eased. Not dramatically. The harvest of 1317 was not good. It was merely not catastrophic. By the standards of 1315 and 1316, not catastrophic felt like abundance. People ate. Not enough. Not well. But ate. The crisis continued in various forms until 1322. 7 years of what historians call the Great Famine, though the absolute worst, the years that broke the rules, were 1315 to 1317. Between 10 and 25% of Northern Europe's population died. Hold that number. Europe's population in 1315 was perhaps 30 million. 10% is 3 million. 25% is 7.5 million. The range between those estimates tells you how catastrophic the record-keeping also became. The Great Famine is not as famous as the Black Death that followed it 30 years later. This is strange, because the Great Famine arguably created the conditions for the Black Death. A population that has spent 7 years malnourished, living in overcrowded cities where they fled from the countryside, weakened by years of substandard nutrition, packed into unsanitary urban conditions. That population is exactly the population that a plague virus moves through fastest. The Great Famine did not just kill the people it killed directly. It built the kindling. The Black Death lit it. And the Europe that existed before 1315, the confident, growing, cathedral-building, university-founding Europe at the ceiling of its medieval capacity, never quite came back. What came back was different, smaller, scarred, with a different relationship to the concept of enough. The survivors knew something the dead did not have to learn. That civilization is thinner than it looks, that the rules hold until they don't. That rain, just rain, falling in the wrong season for 2 years in a row is enough to strip a continent down to what it actually is underneath the cathedrals and the laws and the markets and the careful structures built up over centuries. Just people on a road in the rain, deciding what they can and cannot do to keep going.